Meow, and welcome to the first episode of this year's Banned Books Conversations. I'm your host, Tonya Todd, and we have an amazing lineup this week, both in book selections and in guest panelists. Before we get started with our discussion, I want to give thanks to everyone who helped make this series what it is, including Mike Burton of Genuine Chit Chat for his graphics, platform sharing, and creating promotional reels, Charles Larson for set design and tech management, JP Butler for video production, Rhea Kerrigan for audio production, Dave and Tony of Comics in Motion, and the ladies of Femme, who all let me hijack the schedule this week. And to all of our fantastic guests, success would be impossible without all of you. And as you see, this is one of those things that it's not just me. It takes a whole team to bring this to the table. And I appreciate the time of everyone involved. With that in mind, we're here to talk about banned books, literary works that have been removed from a library shelf or school curriculum. Over the course of Banned Books Week, this series will cover 7 different books, the reasons they were banned, and the value in reading them. The first book in this year's series is I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. I'll warn that there will be book spoilers ahead, but before we get to that, let's meet today's radical readers. We have 2 returning guests. Lisa, please tell us a bit about who you are and what you do.
Hi, I'm Lisa Rayne. I write contemporary and historical romance. I'm also a IP and business lawyer who leads a nonprofit teaching college and graduate students how to do venture capital and finance in the entrepreneur space. In one iteration of my life, I taught high school language arts, and I do have a background in African American studies, so I'm an old fan of Miss Maya. So I'm looking forward to today's chat.
And Amanda, another returning guest.
Hi, I'm Amanda Skenandore. I worked as a nurse for 16 years. I'm a historical fiction author, and I am a banned book reader. And was, very excited when I saw this was one of the books. It's a book I had always wanted to read, and this was a wonderful impetus to do so.
And Kristian, it's your first time here. Welcome.
Yes, it is. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the invitation.
So tell the audience a bit about who you are and what you do.
My name is Kristian Horn. I run a podcast called Part-Time Fanboy. That's pretty much if I'm known for anything, I'm known for that. I'm obsessive about nerd culture and movies, comics mostly, stuff like that. That's what we chat about on my podcast. And I'm also a creative in my daily life. I work as a media producer for an online retailer. And in my spare time, I work on my own like little comic projects and things like that. The latest thing that I've been working on for years and years and years in my spare time is called The Periwinkle Puss. It's about 2 crime-fighting cats. They discover that the catnip in their city has been tainted, and they go investigate. So basically, it's an online web strip, and it's periwinklepuss.com, and Part-Time Fanboy is parttimefanboy.com.
Wonderful. So the ladies have had an opportunity to answer this already, but I want to ask you, what interests you in the banned book conversation?
Well, I'm like a lot of people, I'm extremely distressed about what's kind of like happening in the current climate in this country, particularly regarding books, education, language, freedom of speech, like that sort of thing. And for me, it's just like I don't believe in banning any kind of sort of information. I'm very much against it, particularly books, comic books, media. I just feel like um, it's kind of like an antithesis to what this country was founded on and what freedom is all about. So I believe that people should have access to anything, everything, especially something as enlightening as this particular book. So it's kind of what interests me, and I've always been involved, kind of like politically or interested in politics and things like that, conversations online or social media, for all the good that that does. Get a little bit involved in political campaigns here and there. But when it comes right down to it, I'm against it. So particularly for something as beautiful and wonderful as this particular book is.
Well, as you mentioned, in recent years, we've seen a sharp rise in book bans and challenges. Amanda, what does this rapid increase say about where America is headed as a society?
Well, so being a historical fiction author, and so I delve into the past quite a bit, I think I am actually, I don't know, oddly reassured, I suppose, that this is not new, per se. I've been reading a lot about the World War I era, and they were doing a lot of censorship and banning of books during that time, not necessarily along the same themes, but similar themes. Socialist newspapers, a lot of Black run journals, union type stuff. They were doing a lot of banning at that time. And so on the one hand, I think, okay, like we got through that, right? We made it through that time period, and we still continue to thrive and grow, and move forward as a nation. At the same time, when you look at the broader picture of where we are right now, with what's happening at the Kennedy Center, and now the Smithsonian and what they're trying to do, censoring the history and the art and the artifacts there, it does take on a heightened concern, because it feels like they are trying to, in many ways, silence voices and rewrite the past and erase particular people, from both the past and the present. And I think that's very dangerous. And I worry that we are headed to even more of that if we're not thoughtful and careful.
Lisa.
I would agree with that. I think for me, it's the targeted erasure of particular history that we're going for. And so the history of Blacks, Indigenous, um, immigrants of color, because as we've seen, immigrants who are white or who the majority culture considers white do not have the same banning or disclosures. Historically, banned books have always been primarily people of color and people of different sexual orientations. And as we get into today's culture, it's like we've turned the dial up, right? It's like the regular banning wasn't enough. We now got to take it up a notch. So we've turned the pot up. The pot's boiling a little bit more. And when you erase the history, it makes it easier to tell a different narrative about those people because nobody knows the history. And for me, that's the real danger of where we're headed.
Kristian.
Yes. I mean, I just was thinking, I never thought I would have to live through it, right? Like, I mean, like really, like I just never thought that we would get to the point where, stuff in museums are being censored, books are being censored. I just never thought, I mean, obviously a child of the 80s and all that stuff, there's always been like ultra conservative voices trying to silence certain speech or things, but just to see it actually happening from the top level in our government, it's mind-boggling to me.
So critics of book bans argue that they disproportionately target marginalized voices, which is something that Lisa was mentioning, including books about race, gender identity, and sexuality. Why do you think these themes are often the focus? And we'll start with Kristian this time.
I mean, I think that generally speaking, I mean, is it religion? Is it, voices of power, that are uncomfortable with like certain things in society? For me, it just seems like that there is sort of a power structure at the top that is very uncomfortable with sort of accepting that there are people from other walks of life that have contributed to this society or have contributed to what we've all built, particularly in this country or other countries. I mean, as far as like religion, or sexuality, I also feel that people are very worried about things that intrude upon their very tightly or hard held beliefs, right? Like if you are, I grew up as a Catholic. I'm pretty much agnostic now, but that was one thing as I was growing up, which was very much like, oh, Catholicism tells me that this sort of thing is bad, but then as you grow up, you're like, wait, it's not bad. It's just like, wait, so like very clamping down on what people um, want and feel, and having restrictions on them as far, and it's about control, I guess, is basically what I'm trying to say for the most part. And control of certain groups of people, control of behavior, and that sort of thing. And so then when you sort of grow out of these sort of structures that you were raised in, and you discover things on your own, there's definitely people that just want to reel you in. It's about reeling it in, if that makes any sense.
Does. Lisa.
I like what he said about power, because I think that's what it is. If you want power, you have to have control. And
Yeah.
people who want power and control like to think of themselves as better than. So if you're better than someone else, you've got to find reasons why you're better than someone else. So when we can put people in these boxes that are labeled, we can say race, which we know is a social construct. It doesn't really exist, but we can take skin color that is was turned into race. We can take sexual orientation. We can say these things are bad. And I don't do that. Therefore, I am superior. And these people do it. Therefore, they're inferior. And I
Yeah.
should be in control. And that's the narrative of power.
Amanda.
Yeah, I think, echo what both Kristian and Lisa had to say. I think religion does play a significant part of it. I think about the court case that the Supreme Court decided this summer, Mahmoud versus Taylor, where you have competing interests that are both valid competing interests, right? You have parents, and not just Christianity, but multiple religious people from multiple religious backgrounds that object to the inability to opt out of lessons that talk about LGBTQ people and issues, and that is their right to opt their children out of those lessons is a valid point. But then what happens when we do that, and when it becomes so difficult for schools to teach anything, it becomes easier just to sort of self-censor and not teach those books, because the actual logistics of getting these opt-out permissions in a school district becomes overwhelming. It becomes a huge tax on already taxed resources. And so children suffer, education suffers, education, administration suffers, all of that. So I think that there is a big piece of that is influenced by religion. And again, this tension, right, of the freedom to exercise one's religion, and also the freedom of speech, and what can be taught in schools. But also, I think, touching on what Lisa said about power, this idea that seems to be more and more common now, this like American exceptionalism and pride, and that you can only be a patriot if you acknowledge and tout all the great things that happened in America, and that somehow we are too I don't know, weak-minded to hold multiple ideas in our mind at the same time, that we can be proud of being American, and we can be proud of our country at the same time acknowledging the real truth of both our history and our current situation, that there is so much inequity that we need to improve upon, and somehow the people in power are trying to drive a different narrative, that you can only be one type of patriot, and that you can only find pride in your country if you I don't know, tone down the reality of what history and current day is.
Lisa, what's at stake for readers who are denied access to banned books?
Understanding humanity. We find humanity in the narratives of others. And this notion that children going to school should never read about queer or people with different gender identities. When they leave school, they're going to encounter these people in the world. So why not prepare people for the real world? This illusion that somehow parents who've not studied education, have no background in developing curriculum, now get to tell teachers who we all think should have master's degrees and PhDs to tell our children, but now we're just going to let everyday parents decide what the curriculum should be and review it and approve it. It's what I like to call American hypocrisy. America has this hypocrisy. It's sort of what um Amanda was talking about before. Like, we can't hold these two opinions at the same time. So on the one hand, our teachers are these highly educated, trained professionals who are designing curriculum for our schools, and they have to have all this training. But wait, when we don't like it, we're gonna let Joe Schmo, who has no clue what curriculum development is all about or has no background in child development, education, literature, history, decide what every child in that school or every child in his student's classroom should do. And I've always, my my opinion has always been, and I'm a parent, so I have two children who are now adults, 24-year-old, 28-year-old, and I've always said I parent my kids, right? I know how to parent my kids, right? You parent your kids. If you don't want your children to read this, don't let your children read this, right? Right?
Yep.
Do not take it out of my school library, because the fact that you can't handle your kids and you can't parent your kids and you can't have a conversation about these things with your kids doesn't mean I can't. Quit telling me what my children should have access to in a school that's supposed to be devoid of religion, unless you're going to a religious school. But public school, separation of church and state, is supposed to be a thing until people get upset about something that they don't like.
Amanda.
Um, I, I love what you said, Lisa, about understanding humanity. And I think that really hit home for me reading this book. There's a scene where Maya Marguerite, as she's called, is working at this white woman's house and helping out in the kitchen. And one of this woman's friends was like, we should just call her Mary. Marguerite is too long of a name. And then she does. The woman who's employing her does. She starts calling her Mary. And it just, for some reason, like, that scene really struck me. And I was angry, and I was just shocked. And then I was telling my husband about it because I was so kind of upset, like, how the nerve of this woman. And then he brought up Muhammad Ali, and when he was fighting what's his name? Oh, I wrote it down because I don't want to forget. Ernie Terrell, like, he kept calling him Cassius Clay, and then they had this match, and he's like pummeling him, and he's like, "What's my name? What's my name?" And then it got me thinking, like, I've written about this. I wrote about it with the Native American boarding schools. I wrote about it, with people who had this really highly stigmatized disease, leprosy, and how they had to change their names. And somehow it took all of that, right? All of this discussion, my research, this book, to like make this connection and really see how dehumanizing it is to call someone by a name that is not their name. And so I think what's at risk, right, when readers don't have access to these books, is we're removing pieces of that connective puzzle, so that we, as citizens, as community members, we can't make those connections because the resources aren't there. And that, I mean, I think that's terrible, because it's important. It's important to see these broader issues, and then it's not just issues too. There are patterns of beauty and things that can inspire us. But again, removing some of those connective pieces, we can't make those connections, and I think that's terrible.
Kristian.
Yeah, I mean, when I think as to the question as far as like what is being missed by, you know, people not being able to read certain books or banned books, I think about like my own experience, which is like I've never been like, I love to read, right? I've always loved to read, but I will admit that I'm not like, it takes a lot for me to sit and read a book, or it's always taken a lot. I'm not dyslexic. I'm not, but for me, it's just always been kind of like very hard to like sit down, focus, and read, which is why I think, I got so much into comic books when I was younger because, it's the pictures and, as far as what that says about my own intelligence, you make your own judgments out there. But I do like to read. Like I love to sit down and read. And one of the things I realized when I was younger, when I was like about 19, I moved to Los Angeles to pursue a career in acting, right? Like that was my initial goal. And one of the things that, you get to LA, you're 19. I didn't really finish college. I didn't finish, school. And I just felt like a need to cross the country and go somewhere and discover something. But what I discovered, and it was very much like, what do I do now? Like, how do I do this? And I discovered books like, about film acting, about your career, and I discovered how informative books can be. And I think that like when people are kept from reading certain things, it just limits how far they can go in life and what they can do and their humanity, right? Because especially like even something like this will open your mind to things that you may not have experienced before. And I legitimately think that even the most ignorant among us really wants to go beyond their initial station in life. They want to grow, they want to develop. So if you're being kept from books or reading, even as someone like myself, who's probably not as well read as everyone else on this panel, I still see the value in it and I still love it when I get the chance to do it. So, and when I'm exposed to something like this, like when I was younger, one of the things I did read in college was the autobiography of Malcolm X. And it blew my mind. Like, and the thing that I learned, one of the biggest things that I learned, and I can get more into it later in relation to having read this book and the connections that I made between the two books. But for Malcolm X to start somewhere and then go somewhere else in his life and become the leader that he became, and then change his views on, whiteness and black people and all that stuff, it just really inspired me to see that like somebody like me who didn't know where they were going in life, that things could change, right? And this is kind of my Angelou's is the same thing, right? Like after I read this book, I hunted down the documentary that I think PBS did years ago, and just seeing like the development of her life and the way that this book ended too. Was a little bit distressing to me because I was like, oh no, 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 no. But like knowing that the way that her life ends up and where she went, I mean, this is the sort of thing that, when I was young, particularly with the autobiography of Malcolm X, I was just like, oh, you can change. Like people can
Mm.
change. And if you're not, the thing that books give you or media gives you is our ideas that will help you change your own self or see something in yourself that you can grow and develop. Hopefully I'm making sense or not
You're
just
making a
rambling at
lot
this
of
point.
sense.
Yeah, yeah.
I get
What I'm
very
hearing is,
enthusiastic sometimes. So yeah, I tend to
what I'm
ramble
hearing
on
is,
my own podcast.
I don't read a lot of books, but when I do, I go hard.
Well, I do. Yeah, I get into it. I get into it. Yeah, yeah.
Amanda, what role should government, school boards, and libraries play in either limiting or protecting access to books? And for that matter, what about parents?
I honestly, I think that it's the role of all of the above to be protecting books. And at the very least, I think the government should stay out of it. Stop meddling. But a better way, I think, would be to actively protect people's access to books, especially in public spaces, right? I'm not saying that they have to be accessible everywhere, but in these places that we have built to help foster our citizenry, then we should be protecting those books. And the reason I loop parents in, I think, like Lisa was saying, definitely parents, it's for the parents to decide what their children have access to. But ultimately, and I suppose we'll get to this a little bit later, but like what's censored today doesn't necessarily mean, what's going to be censored tomorrow. And by protecting in general people's right to read and these spaces where books are available, and again, not just books, but like we're talking about, knowledge, and things like that. You may be looking out for someone else today, but yourself and your children tomorrow.
Kristian.
Well, as far as the government, zero, like zilch, like no, no. I mean, they shouldn't have any control as far as like what I read, what I want to read, what anyone else should read. I mean, and they should protect our right to read. Like that's basically like, in the Constitution, right? Like it's one of the biggest things that we should, be able to say what we want and express our mind and, have access to, I mean, it's not explicitly stated, but you should be able to express your opinion and um, put it out in the world. Now, as far as like, other bodies, I mean, we kind of already do restrict stuff, right? I mean, we put children's books in the children's section, right? We put YA, we classify things. So there's some guidance there as far as like, okay, maybe this is good for you, maybe this isn't good for you. And then, as far as like, I'm a parent, like there were a lot of things like experiences I had with my daughter where I saw like certain TV shows or certain comics, because obviously I'm into comics. So I would give her comics and I would see like I'm just going to use Calvin and Hobbes as an example. Like she started reading it when she was young and she started acting out like Calvin, right? Like she started, and it was like, okay, so we need to pull this back a little bit. Like, let's just, you can read it when you're a little older because maybe she was too young. She was like 4 or 5, and and there were certain other things like maybe like the movie Lilo and Stitch. Like Stitch is a little naughty, you know what I mean? And so she would start out. So then we're like, okay, we're going to pull that out of the rotation, right? We're not going to watch it. Nothing against Lilo and Stitch, nothing against Calvin and Hobbes. As far as I'm concerned, they're like the most amazing things ever. But as parents, and I grew up. Uh, my mother was a single mom, single parent, so I know that it's harder for other people. And luckily, my daughter had two parents, me and my wife. But you have the ability to kind of like check in on your kids, notice what's going on, particularly when they're young. At least that's my opinion. And be able to be like, hey, like maybe this isn't good for you, or maybe this isn't. And I'm also not gonna say that I'm the smartest guy in the room either, because I know that while she was in school, she discovered books. And my daughter is a voracious reader, which, thank goodness. But I know that there were things that she was reading that if I probably knew that she had been exposed to, maybe turned my hair white or something, or I thought that she was a little too young. But you know what? That's part of that. And that's in this book too, right? Like the experience of growing up and being like, oh, is this okay for me? Am I okay to do this? Like, and so I don't think that we should be restricted. We already have things in society that are guides to like what maybe certain people will like and won't like. Like I mean, even just classifying things as like horror or romance. Like yeah, I'm not going to go read the romance because that's not what I'm into. So those are very subtle things in our society that are laid out for us and are already there, and we can use them as tools.
I bet you there are scenes in Lisa's books that you would enjoy and appreciate.
I'll have to check it
Don't
out.
put me in the hot seat.
I just remember you reading a fight scene for Dime Grinds one year, and the men could not stop talking about it. After you were done, like days after, people in the group were like, man, she really knows how to write a fight scene. And when I mentioned it to you, you're like, yeah, because it's like making love.
Oh, wow.
I remember
It's a
that.
dance, it's a choreography, yeah, it all goes together.
No,
And
I believe
also that's exposure to stuff because, talk about how that ended up in my writing. Well, I'm a movie lover. I'm also a voracious reader, but I also love movies, right? And action adventure movies have always been my catnip. So all of that's in me. And so when I went to write a Highlander book, you can't have a Highlander book. I mean, some people do, but I felt I couldn't write a Highlander book without having some battle scenes. You gotta have some fight scenes,
Yeah,
right? Guy
there
got a
can be only
sword.
one.
He's a big hero. We gotta, so, but that's exposure I've gotten through media. And some of that exposure was also reading other books. I'm big Christian mentioned horror. I'm a big horror fan. I grew up on horror. I found horror in high school. My mom couldn't stand horror, but did she stop me from reading it? No, right? Thrillers, like all of that. And I've always found it interesting that there are books, if they mention, even in a young adult, the curiosity, those books where they're realizing I am a guy and I think I like my other guy friend, or I'm a girl and I think I like, and exploring that and seeing what it looks like. Well, there are really children in that classroom experiencing that. And to be able to find themselves in a book and explore those questions and issues in a book, maybe alone in their room, or maybe later they've got a friend to talk. That is just so valuable. And government needs to stay out of that. Like it within the family, within the eternal, um, we decide what our family, what our household, what our children, like Christian, do I think my kids snuck and read some books? Maybe. But my kids had pretty close parameters. He's talking about Calvin and Hobbes. Like, when my kids were little, Jordan's like, you could watch Disney Channel, Nickelodeon, and only to a certain time. And my child learned early that there were channels she couldn't watch. And she would get to the point that if there was a grown up in the house, before 8 o'clock, and she was in the room and they switched from Disney Channel or Nickelodeon or any proof, she'd be like, that is not a child friendly channel. And they'd have to change it. Like she learned. And that's what I mean about parenting and parameters. If she snuck to read something, then we had a policy in my house to talk about things. I knew if my child experienced something in literature that she had a question about, she would not have a problem coming to talk to me about it. And sure, she's going to talk to her friends, but when push comes to shove, if she had any doubts that anybody was telling her right, they were going to come ask questions. And that's what we want to encourage. So when we can't talk about literature that are the hard things, we don't know what the hard thing is for that child. So we're also telling a lot of children that what you're challenged by, what you may be thinking about, what you're feeling, what you're experiencing, it's not okay. It's so bad, we're going to ban people from reading about it and talking about it. And thus, we have a country with a very high suicide rate amongst young adults because we keep telling them they're not good enough. And
Mm,
that's sad. That's just really sad.
wow.
Well, Amanda, you brought up earlier that there's been a change and a shift about what books are controversial and when. So some books like 1984, Brave New World were once considered controversial, but now they're considered classics. Although even recently, 1984 is being banned again. What do these shifts tell us about how censorship evolves over time and who gets to decide which books are dangerous?
I think it's sort of implicit in the question, but it does say that it is something that changes, and that it, kind of going back to what we talked about at the beginning, this idea about power, that it is the person that is in power or the people that are in power that get to decide that, and that does to some extent change. But I guess not to sound like Pollyanna-ish, but I also looking at that and looking at the way that things have changed, it gives me a little bit of hope. Like it used to be illegal to distribute any literature about birth control. Like that was illegal. People were arrested, served jail time for doing that. And now, thank goodness, we can talk about birth control and we can distribute information and have access to birth control, right? So I look at things like that and I think we are making progress. If we can feel sometimes like we are just, I don't know. The expression that I think that comes to mind is like going to hell in a handbasket. But but then when you do think that things, what is being censored changes, sometimes it's a little fickle, like you mentioned, that things will, and almost like the way that they go in and out of vogue, that they'll be banned and then not banned and then banned again, depending. But I do feel like there is a slow but steady progress in what I'm seeing. And I hope that it continues, because that's not a guarantee. That's not a given, and we shouldn't take it for that. That just because in some ways we have improved, that we are going to continue to improve. That's, I think, what we're fighting for in this moment.
Kristian.
I mean, uh, in regards to, sorry, can you repeat the question again? I'm just
Sure.
trying to.
So there are some books that used to be considered controversial that are now
Oh,
considered classics, but
yeah.
and basically, what does this shift tell us about how censorship evolves over time?
Well, I mean, yeah, it's so interesting because I mean, just in the conversation of like, so in my own, in relation to me, and not censorship necessarily, but like with pop culture and comic books, right? Like there have been a lot of artists through the years. Like that's my jam, is art. Like I love artists, I love, stuff like that. And there is an exhibit in Los Angeles right now, about the Jack Kirby, the guy that helped co-create the Marvel universe with like Stan Lee. And when I was a kid, like I hated his art. Like I was just like, I did not like it. It was blocky, the anatomy, you know what I mean? And then it was only as I got older that I realized the sort of sophistication behind it and what was going on and everything like that. And then, so I mean, just in relation to like how times change, and now you've got like multi-billion dollar movies being made out of characters, which, quite honestly, there were certain people that regarded comic books like toilet reading. Like you read, it's not serious like literature or art. And now it is. So I mean, it's the way things change, and the way that you know like society develops, right? And the openness of, that occurred like during the 60s and the 70s. If you try to repress people, or you try to keep people from something, and I think it's something that somebody was saying earlier, people get curious about it and they start investigating it, and they look, and even if it's censored or kept from them, right? And so you're never going to be able to sort of like clamp that down. So, it seems like, censorship in any way, to a certain extent, is like a Sisyphean, enterprise. It's just not going to work. But as far as the way things change, I mean, again, it goes back to sort of like who's in power, what's in power, who says what's good, who says what's not, right? Like, and it's unfortunate that, it depends on who's running. It's a little bit like the outer limits. Sorry, I'm such a nerd. It's like we control the horizontal, we control the vertical. Like, you know what I mean? It's who's in charge and who's trying to keep things away from you. Um, and it's just the way, I'm a big fan of like 20th century history. And it's just, World War One, World War Two, the conservatism of the 50s. Like, why did that develop? And it's just, in a reaction, because it's like, oh my God, we've been through two wars. Can we just like not have, can we just have nice things and not like look at like the bad things? So it's just all those sort of things that kind of like um, help change, what's going on in society and what people appreciate and they don't. If I'm making any sense, again, please tell me. I'm not.
You are, and remember, this is also going out on the Comics in Motion feed, so I
Yeah.
bet that particular audience will
Yeah.
appreciate your references. There's no need to apologize.
Yeah. No, I just always go back to what I know. So yeah.
Yeah.
But
And it's a
yeah.
perspective that no one else is bringing, so I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Lisa.
Well, I think maybe to connect the dots, you kind of mentioned that, 1984 is sort of coming back around to being on the list, but that's because what's talked about in 1984 is
Yeah.
very similar to a lot of what's beginning to happen currently in society. And those in power who don't want people to be aware of the dynamics of what's going on, right? And don't want people to think it's bad because there's commentary in 1984 that suggests this is not the way society should be run. So now it's like, whoa, 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 we can't be reading that book anymore. Let's get that off of the reading
Yeah.
list, right? In school, because we don't want people to wake up. And, as Kristen was saying, I think we evolve and we grow. And so as society progresses, we get some rights, right? Amanda was like, we get some rights. But as we've seen, those rights can be scaled back. So things that used to be okay, that we had taken for granted, that we'd earned those rights, there's now talk to take them away, right? There's people starting to talk about the fact that women shouldn't have the right to vote. I'm like, really? We gonna go back around that hurdle again? Like, come on, people, right? Once we got rid of Roe v. Wade, now we're talking about limitations on birth control. And once those limitations starts going, we may not be able to talk about it anymore, right? And that's why the banning gets dangerous, because it's sort of like, let's see how far we can go with this. And if we can get this banned in the literature, then how can we then get things changed or nullified or get rid of them in society? Because nobody's talking about them. Nobody understands it. Nobody has having a discussion. No one's dissenting, right? That's also white, right, in the literature. They want to get rid of the literature that says something that happens is bad. If that's the thing you want to do, you don't want books that say this is bad. Those are the books that are going to get banned and challenged.
So you mentioned dissenting. What are some ways that everyday readers can dissent? How can they take action to defend the right to read? Lisa.
Well, I was heartened to know that when things like defunding of libraries and things began to happen, people began to rally against it and talk about petitions and develop phone trees and share the numbers of congressmen, and let's complain, let's call our representatives, let's find ways to get around this, let's talk about how horrible it is. So people really do have to be vocal. We have to make those people who think it's okay uncomfortable with our voices and take action. This is not the kind of thing you can just be silent about and expect things to go away. We have to use our voice and we have to rally together, because one of the reasons I feel that we now have funding coming back in place for libraries is because so many of us complained and came together. And the volume of using that voice with a large community of people consistently over time brings change. And we have to get back into the mentality. It, it's like it's time to fight for civil rights again. I mean, like, I never thought I'd really have to say this, but right, it's time to take those lessons from people coming together to fight for rights and fight for legislation and to turn things over and to do it as a group, as a community. We need the large volume of people working together.
Kristian.
I mean, for me, it's been protesting, trying to get involved in like campaigns as much as I can. I mean, I've been protesting since day one, since the first administration. Like, I've been out on the any chance I get. COVID kind of stopped me in my tracks, obviously, but for me, it's like being out in the streets, right? And it also offers a sense of camaraderie, like I'm not alone, like because that is very much like a thing, at least for me, that starts to set in, right? Especially when you live in Los Angeles, which is a city where you have to like drive everywhere. You don't necessarily have neighborhoods. You go out for a walk and maybe you see like three people, like, you know what I mean? But, I feel like for me, it's like getting involved with other people and going out and, like Lisa said, which is like very much like making your voice heard, but in a loud way and in numbers, right? Like that's important. And then, you know, to a certain extent, like what you're doing, right? Or what we're doing here, right? Is talking about a particular book or something that has been banned, right? Or things that make people uncomfortable and not shying away from that sort of thing. Because I mean, I just feel like, you know, dissent is just, I mean, it's important. You know, it's kind of like one of the biggest things in the forming of this country. We were based in a revolution. You can't just sit back and like, you know, accept whatever the powers that be want to give you, right? Or say that you are. So, I mean, that's sort of been what I've done since the very beginning. I just felt like this very like 1960s mood hit me during the first, you know, Trump administration, where I was like, I gotta go out. I just gotta, I don't even know if anyone else is gonna be there. It's just, even if it's just me, just like standing there in downtown LA. But luckily you go and there's like tons of people. So, you know, and I also feel like if there are town halls, like attend. I've just started doing that like recently, and going to see more out of curiosity to see like what the politicians are actually saying to the people. And you know, not necessarily to say anything, but try to get an idea of like, how does this work? How can I understand it? How, you know, is this, you know, just all a game to them, or is this real? So it's very interesting to watch. And I mean, I just think very much you've got to go out and get involved. Or if you have media, or like for me, it's a podcast. For you, it's this. It's whenever you get a chance to talk about subjects like this, you bring it up. You don't shy away from it, right?
Amanda.
Yeah, I think, dovetail right off of that and say it's important readers can take action by not self-censoring themselves. That's something that, you know, environments like this, it encourages people to do that. Like the threat of a book being taken out of the library might be enough that the library doesn't buy that book in the first place. And we don't want that. But even on an individual level, maybe you're part of a book club and you want to read, you wanted to bring this book, but oh, you hear that it's controversial, and so you self-censor and you don't put it forward in your book club. Or you have a little free lending library and you don't put it out there because, you know, you're, again, I think afraid of the blowback. And I get that. Like, I'm not someone who is great at contentious discussions, but it's so important. And at the end of the day, that's what it's about. I think it's about the conversations that we're having here, the conversations that you have, you know, Kristian, when you're out there and you are protesting and attending the town hall meetings, like those are all so important. And we are not going to make it out of this incredibly polarized state that we're in without having these conversations. And so part of that, I think, is just being conscious about one, engaging in those conversations and making sure that we're not shuffling away from them because they're uncomfortable.
I just want to say that's a really great point. I love that
Yeah.
point about self-censorship and the tendency for people to pull back on their own. I just, it's so key right now that we don't do that. And I think that is a big worry that a lot of people um take on. Like, I just don't want to be a part of this, so I'm just going to cave ahead of time.
Yeah, yeah. I just to pile on top of that, I mean, after this last election, I very much had that feeling where it was very much like, what's the point? Like, what's, you know, what's the point? You know what I mean? But like the three of you, I mean, I just at some point I had to rebound, right? So I feel like to fight censorship and fight that stuff, you have to kind of like get up, dust yourself off, and make your voice heard, and not shrink, you know,
Mm.
when the opportunity arises.
So now let's talk about today's banned book. So I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings is a modern American classic beloved worldwide. Published in 1969, Maya Angelou's debut memoir is the first in her series of 7 autobiographies. As joyous and painful, mysterious and memorable as childhood itself, the book captures the longing of lonely children, the brute insult of bigotry, and the wonder of words that can make the world right. This book catapulted Angelou to international fame and critical acclaim. In 2011, Time magazine placed Caged Bird as in one in its list of 100 best and most influential books written in English since 1923. It was a 1970 National Book Award nominee and earned the Coretta Scott King Book Award for Author Honor 1971. Caged Bird is lauded as a significant development in Black women's literature and credited with heralding the success of other now prominent writers. Before its publication, Black women writers were marginalized to the point that they were unable to present themselves as central characters. James Baldwin called the book a biblical study of life in the midst of death. Historian Robert A. Gross called it a tour de force of language. Writer and theater critic Hilton Owl said that Caged Bird marked one of the first times that a Black autobiographer could write about Blackness from the inside without apology or defense. And yet it has been on the American Library Association's list of the 100 most frequently challenged books for decades, reaching as high as number 3 from 1990 to 2000. Amanda, what compelled you to choose this book among the options in this year's Banned Books Conversations?
You know, I had mentioned, here's my little copy. I bought this well over a decade ago, and it's been on my shelf, and it's been one of those books that I see and I think, oh, I want to read that. And then, you know, with her recent passing, I was like, oh, I wanted, you know, even more to read that. And then also, I'm sure, as you guys know, like your to be read pile just gets ginormous, right? And so somehow I hadn't gotten to this book, and then when I saw that that it was one of the books you were considering, immediately I was like, oh, that's the one. That's the one I really want to be part of that discussion. There's something, I mean, right from the beginning, right from the title, there's something so captivating about the language of the book. And somehow I knew that it would speak to me on that level, if not on many, many more levels. And that's really why I wanted to be part of the discussion.
Lisa.
Well, this is a book that I have read multiple times, but it's been a while, right? Like, I'm a comparative literature major, so obviously I read it in college, but I actually discovered it in high school in a AP literature class. And as a Black teenager in a predominantly white institution, to encounter a book written by a Black woman, and first of all, so beautifully written, and I was into poetry then. So this book is just, the language itself is just gorgeous. But to have someone unapologetically talk about race, um, sexuality, the coming to terms with lesbianism, even, like, there was so much in this book. It just kind of blew my mind. And it's a book that just doesn't leave you. Like, so I think a little bit like Amanda. So I saw it on the list and I thought, oh, I've got to read that book again. And I'm going to tell you, I couldn't find my copy. I've got a marked up copy someplace. So I went and bought another one. So I now have another one because, you know, it's my Angelou. So I have another copy. And of course, as soon as we stop recording this, I'm going to walk someplace and there's going to be that copy just laying
Of
out
course.
open, right? But the power of this book, no matter how many times I read it, I feel like I learn something new and it changes me. And that's the power of these words for me.
And now, Kristian, you and I met on your show where you talk about comic books. We were talking about comic books. We ended up talking about banned books. And by the end of it, I knew I was going to invite you to participate. We even discussed the possibility of you being on the show where we're talking about Flamer. I just assumed you would gravitate toward the graphic novel, but when I gave you the list, you chose this book.
Yeah, I guess I didn't. Yeah, I just looked at the list, and you know, Maya Angelou is somebody who I've always known about. I'm a huge fan of documentaries too.
Mm.
So I've seen a lot of documentary. I've seen documentaries on her. I read interviews about her. I've read articles, like when there were magazines, there were these things called magazines, kids, that we used to read. And, I just have read a lot about her. But again, it's not that I don't like to read. I do love to read, but sometimes it's just like a matter of focus, like sitting down and like making the time to read. And it's just, I've always wanted to read something by her. And for some reason, when I saw and I find her to be, or I found her to be a very uplifting person, right? Like a very inspirational person. So I saw the book, and just because of the time that we were in, I was like, that's it. I was like, I want to read that. She's going to inspire me. I'm going to feel good about myself, and I'm, not myself, but I'm going to feel good about the world or whatever. It's going to make me, and I'm so glad I did, because I mean, it's not always an easy read emotionally and stuff like that,
Mhm.
but it's just poetry. I mean, it's just gorgeous. Like, it is really a gorgeous book, and I thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to come on this show, and giving me the choice to read it, because it like really just, I don't know why. I was just like, I want to read that. I want to read her. And maybe it has something to do with, I mentioned before, the autobiography of Malcolm X.
Mm.
Because when I read that when I was 19, I was just like, and I was just like, whoa, what happened? Like, and I know that may sound strange coming from somebody who looks like I do, but I'm also kind of like half Latin. So growing up, I had to experience like racism directed towards people that were Latin, and I'm standing there and I'm like, yeah, I'm not with that. You know what I mean? So it's just, I'm so glad that I checked it out. It's just, I've always been curious about her. And it is that desire there is a self-consciousness about me where it's like I mostly read comic books. Again, my wife and my daughter are voracious readers, but there's always that thing within me where it's like, gosh, I just wish I could read more better books, more books. I wish I could be like, and so I just felt like I had to read that because I felt like it's so well regarded, and it's banned in so many places, and she seemed like such a wonderful individual. Like, I was just like, that's it, that's what I want to read. So
Well, I have been dying to ask you that question.
sorry I didn't pick the graphic novel. I guess, I just
I'm
didn't.
not sorry though. Like I had plenty of people who wanted to read that. In fact, I had more people wanted to read that than I had spots for on the panel.
Sure.
So it was
Well, there's
actually a real
pictures.
blessing when you said this one.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, I was wondering if you were like, why did he pick that? And I was just like, I don't know. There's some about, I just felt like right now was the time to like, I'd always want to be more exposed to, I want to better myself as a person. And so I was like, that's the one. And you had the Handmaid's Tale on there and something like, oh, that's just gonna bring me down. And I was just like, especially with how like we're living in the reality of it. So I was just like, I just wanted to, and I'm so glad because it's just, again, emotionally at times a very hard read, but just wonderful and inspiring, and just like really, just you know why it's a classic. Like, I mean, I'm not even halfway, 20 pages in, 10 pages in, I was like, yep, I'm in. I'm gonna read this whole thing. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that you chose this one. It's just that I was so curious when you first selected it. And then at the beginning of our conversation here, as you're saying, I don't really read a lot of books. Like, so why did you read this one?
I just,
But these are
but
great
that's the thing
reasons.
is, yeah, I think that, and like I said before, even among sort of the most ignorant of us, there's always a desire to be better, right? Like, you want to be better. You don't want to be looked down upon. And that is always has been a self-conscious thing for me. It's like, why don't I read more books, or why can't I sit and focus, or things like that. But when I do go on vacation, I always find myself like reading a book, and it's because there's my attention is not divided at all. So like, it was summer and there were a lot of things going on, and but we did have a bit of a vacation, and so I was able to sit down and take the time and really focus, and I'm just so glad I did.
Lisa, did any parts of this book offend you or make you uncomfortable? And if so, how did you react?
I don't know about offend. Made me angry. I'm like, how do you rape an 8-year-old and get 1 day in jail? Like,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
like, yeah. a visceral reaction to that for sure. Um, and I, for me, because I am like one of those voracious readers, um, like Christian has in his household, like I think found I'm I'm used to using literature to get to understand someone else's experience. And these were her real experiences. So, how do you allow yourself to be offended by what truly happened in someone's life? For me, it's the opportunity to step in. It's a window into what another experience is like, and with all the lows and the hard parts, we've already said it's a hard read. There was something on the other side that showed her overcoming. And so I could get into those hard parts and sit with my anger, or how could the world be like that, but then see her come through it and be like, okay, right? That's what I want to remember, the overcoming. The experience was there, but the overcoming. But there were lots of windows into how society failed her as a child, as a teen, and it did make me angry, but I wouldn't say offended.
How about you, Christian? Did any parts of the book offend you?
No, I mean, the offensiveness of life and what happened to her, like Lisa was saying, that was very much like, it made me sad. Like there were a lot of parts where I was like, oh man, particularly the sexual assault, the graduation scene, stuff like
Mhm.
that. Particularly when she speaks as to sort of how blackness is kind of like pushed down by white society, that sort of thing made me sad. And I remember having that reaction when reading the autobiography of Malcolm X when I was 19, being like, oh, like understanding in a certain way that there is a class of people in this society that, the power structure will not take seriously just because of the color of their skin, right? And so there's nothing like that offended me as far as like, oh, the contents of this book are offensive, but
Mm,
life offended me. What happened offended me, made me sad, but not in like a way where I was just like because when I got to the sexual assault part of the book, the rape, to not to sugarcoat it at all. I mean, I was sitting by a pool at a resort, like we were on vacation, and I was just like, oh, wow. And I was reading it and I was going through it like sitting on a beach chair, and I was just like, I'm really sad. Like I was really sad, but like that's the thing, right? Like one of the reasons that I'm not, I don't see myself as like an average moviegoer or an average consumer of media. Like one of the reasons that people go to movies or watch TV, whether they know it or not, is to get a reaction, right? Is to
mhm,
experience the emotion that you are not going to experience in like your daily life, right? At the office or at the supermarket or whatever. We kind of, a lot of us walk through life like subdued, right? Like not feeling those big emotions. Like you can't just be standing at the Target and just start crying like because something makes. So I mean something like this, it didn't offend, nothing offends me, but I mean I did feel the emotion of it. I did feel the weight of it. And I'm the type of person that welcomes that, right? Especially having been an actor. It's like you want accessibility to the things that you are consuming, right? You don't want to tamp it down or shut it down. Like my mother is very much like, oh, I only like nice things. I only like, and I'm like, no, you need to see like the horrible things in life so that you can come out the other side. And there was nothing in this book that offended me in that way. But it was more the situations that she experienced and had to go through. And as to Lisa's point, like that's her life, like, and we've all had horrible experiences like in our lives, like terrible things, like my father died when I was 5, like, so, but somehow you get through them. So there is a thing in this book that I'm not the type of person that gets like offended by things that I think other people are like getting offended by in this book. I find it inspirational. You know what I mean? I find it the sort of thing, it's terrible, but the fact that you can come through it and become the person that she became, like I was talking about earlier, is like, I mean, how can you not look at that and just be inspired by it? Or look at it as like the wonder of life. You know what I mean? It's incredible. So, I mean, I was saddened by it. I was brought down low in parts by it, you know, particularly in places that, you know, again, at a beach resort where I didn't think I was going to be. But, you know, I mean, it was good too because I had the quiet time to sit and think while I was reading it and experience that emotion, right? I wasn't rushed, like trying to get somewhere and, oh, I have to finish this chapter. So it was kind of like a blessing in disguise. But no, I'm hard pressed to find why, and maybe it's just my own the way that I think about things, to see why you would be offended by anything in a book like this, particularly when it is about such a magnificent human being and how they come out the other side of it. Hopefully that makes sense.
Amanda.
Yeah, I would echo that I wasn't offended by anything in the book, but I was uncomfortable at the very end when, sorry, we did say there would be spoilers, where she becomes pregnant. And then it just, the book very quickly ends, which I think is,
Yeah.
you know, like thinking through it, like this is a book about her childhood, and I very much can see how that would end your childhood. But you know, I'm part of that, like the Dare generation, right? Where you have like, this is your brain on drugs. You know, any questions? It's like you had kids do what you wanted them to do by fear. And that was something that was ingrained in me. Like, if you have a child in your teen years, it will ruin your life. Like that was what I was told in all sorts of ways, you know. So to read this, and then it was, she just she just took it so much in stride, and her family took it so much in stride, and that was unsettling for me, like I said. But it was great because then I like stepped back and thought, why is that upset? Like, why does that unsettling for me? Like, why do I have such a visceral reaction to this? And again, like that's why we read, right? Because we're learning about other people's experiences. We're learning that it doesn't have to be the end of your life. And that, you know, and I think kind of chipping away at our own biases and kind of misthinkings, I guess, for lack of a better word.
But that's kind of how the socialization works, right? Because she got pregnant as a teenager at a time where girls were kicked out of high school if the school found out you were pregnant. So on the one hand, they say having this kid is going to ruin your life, but then they help ruin your life
Right.
by
Yeah.
not allowing you to finish your education.
Yeah.
So, but the socialization that this is a horrible thing for a teenage girl, and only the teenage girl. Nobody ever talks about the guy who got her pregnant, right? It's like she didn't impregnate herself, but it's the teenage girl who becomes the pariah of society, who can't finish the education. She's such a bad person that we can't even have her around other girls because it might rub off on them, kind of thing. And that's the socialization of what is proper and what is not. And I think that is part of what offended people about this book, that happened to her. And instead of it being a tale of woe and a tale of, oh my God, my life was over, don't do this, she's gonna have a tale of, well, that happened to me and I'm gonna go overcome it, you know. And
Yeah.
that was not the message that they wanted to hear about teen pregnancy.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have to say that the ending of the book, like I was almost done with the book and I wanted to do a little bit of research in preparation for this, and the ending got spoiled. Like I was like, no, no, no. I was reading a paragraph and I got to, and I was like, wait, 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 wait. I was like, stop, no, no, no. And I'd already read it and it broke my heart. Like it broke, like when I read it, I was like, oh my God, this is the end of life. Like, I mean, you becoming pregnant at 60, like I was just like very much again the 80s. It's like I was very conditioned and you know, and like you said, dare to stay off drug. But I mean, but when I read it in the book, I was like, whoa, like this is like not the end of the world for her. Like they came together and they decided that she was going to have the baby and they weren't going to make it ruin her life. And I was just like, when have you ever seen that in like literally anything about teenage pregnancy? When, I mean, obviously we don't all want our teenagers to go off and get pregnant, but I'm just saying, like, because to us in the 80s, it was presented, oh my God, it's the worst thing, you know, and and at the end of this book, it's very much like, again, like just turning it on its head, and it almost becomes like a positive thing, right? Like, so I was just, it just blew my mind because when it was spoiled for me, I was like, oh God, like this is so like, and then I was like, no, I don't want her to just end up like a, kid, like a teen, like, oh, just your life is over. But then reading how her mother came together and like just accepted it, and we're gonna get through it, and just like not making it the worst thing in the world. Again, I was just so blown away.
So, Lisa, you talked a little bit about it, but what aspects of this book do you think most contributed to its censorship?
Given the time that this book first came out and the objections, I think a lot of the racism parts wanted heavy censure. We are a country that has never been comfortable talking out in the open about its history of racism, segregation, Klan. I mean, there's stuff about the Klan in here, segregation, blatant racism against her as a little Black girl, and how she was perceived by other people just because she was a Black girl. And those have never been comfortable conversations. And then when you think about when this book came out and was first published and first being like, she could, I'm gonna like, she hit the trifecta, to be honest, really, of like banned books, right? She got
Yeah.
racism, she's got LGBTQism, and she's got sexuality stuff in there. Like Maya, just like, let me just, if I'm gonna go there, I'm gonna go there, right? But that was her life. But um, I think a big part of it was the discomfort with the discussion of racism out in the open. And like I said, like when I was in high school and I encountered this book, that open discussion of the racism she encountered in a way where it was never um pulled back. There was never, it was racism, but I'm sure they were ignorant people, and like there was no justification of it. It's just, this is what happened. I'm going to lay it out here, and this is how it made me feel. That's powerful. Well, okay, it's powerful as a Black teenage woman, right? I think for the majority and the people who wanted to ban it, it was, how dare she? How dare she make us look like racists? Even though that is the history of the country. But I think that's one of the main reasons for the banning of this book.
Amanda.
Yeah, I definitely would. I think you're right. It was like the trifecta of things. It's really interesting to me, Tony, what you said about the 90s to 2000, that was when it was reached the highest, if you will, on the list. And I'm just very curious about that. It does make me think that the LGBTQ piece in particular maybe made people uncomfortable because that was a big issue during that time. But I think now, kind of, what you were saying, Lisa, about like we're trying to like gloss over all of that, as if the racism, I mean, like as if we cannot take pride in our country and also grapple with that and recognize that and learn about that. There's this weird, I don't know, tendency to not want to talk about that anymore, and to somehow say it makes people feel bad about themselves. Like, give people a little credit. And also, it's okay, it's okay to sit and be uncomfortable. It's good. It's a good thing. It is good for us. Sorry, I feel like I'm shouting though. But yeah, so I think those are probably the big reasons.
You're passionate. We love that. Kristian.
Well, for me, it was very much, again, I keep talking about the autobiography of Malcolm X, and I apologize because I know we're talking about, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, but when I was 19, the concept of white devils and the concept of like white people are the problem, and they've caused problems for us throughout, generations and centuries and like that. And I remember specifically reading that stuff in his book and being like, well, of course, like just being like, no question whatsoever. Like, and maybe it's because of having felt kind of like othered growing up, like single parent, no dad, a Latin mom, uh, growing up in mostly a white community, or what felt like mostly white, like high school. So, and like all these things of like never fitting in. But I think that there's very much this sort of concept in I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, which is like she talks about white people with such disdain, and it's based in the reality of her experience, right? And it's justified, right? And so you're going to have like a white power structure that's going to be like, wait, no. Like we're no, no, no. Of course, well, what are you talking about? And of course, anytime you talk about that sort of um institutionalized racism, or the fact that slavery was a bad thing, which is like a discussion that's happening on, was it bad, was it, like, that's just blowing my mind, like, like or that certain slaves were like happy and like content, like it's just this weird thing that a certain segment of white society just can't accept, that we have this horrible past that we can't come up against. And I could see people reading this book, and she just outwardly is just like, yeah, white people are terrible, white people are awful, I don't want to have anything to do with them. And this sort of like weird thing that happens in certain white people's minds, where it's like, oh, reverse racism or whatever, like that. And it's just nonsense, like, because without if people don't look at the context of history and like what has been done, then to them they're just probably shocked, like, oh, why would she be like that, why would she think like, so it comes from ignorance too, right? But that to me is kind of like the biggest thing of why people may particularly now want to ban it, which is like, why would you talk about, like, can't we all, it's always been great, things have always, like, this country's fantastic, we never persecuted anyone, we never, and it's this weird sort of the thing that I've always said about, like, when I'm confronted with like Southern people who are like proud of like their relatives that like fought in the Civil War or whatever. And I'm just like, look, we've all got that kind of crazy uncle that we're all ashamed of. Like, can't the Civil War be like that? Like I love like the relative or like my lineage, but can't we be ashamed of the crazy uncle? Let's just put him over there. Like we don't have to speak of it with pride, because it's absolutely shameful. So I think that this particular book very much brings those things to the forefront, which is like, oh, not white people are not just these beautiful angels and all giving, and that's the biggest thing, and that's why it reminded me of the autobiography of Malcolm X, because that was the very first time I was presented with that idea, and like in my brain I just went like, oh yeah, I mean, sure, yeah, sure, of course, like yeah, like you know what I mean. So I just that's probably why I feel like that this book has been so I mean, obviously there's the assault and the LGBTQ stuff, and but I think for me the biggest thing particularly right now is they're just trying to ban things that say that things weren't always perfect for like people of color, like, you know what I mean? And that there is a reason to have been angry with them, and that it's justified.
Mhm. So there are too many bans and challenges to list them all today, but I will highlight some of those listed by marshall.edu, some of the more recent ones. So in 2002, it was banned for language and being too explicit in the book's portrayal of rape and other sexual abuse. In 2006, it was removed as required reading from the Annapolis, Maryland freshman English curriculum because of rape scenes, or because of the rape scene and other mature content. In 2021, the Matsu Borough School District School Board in Palmer, Alaska, voted to remove 5 books identified as controversial from the school curriculum, including today's book. The board cited sexual content that could cause controversy and anti-white messaging. One board member claimed that it could generate an Equal Employment Opportunity Commission lawsuit. And then in September of 2024, this book and 58 other titles were ordered for removal from all libraries in the Council Bluffs Community School District. The superintendent said that the books were removed to comply with Senate File 496, an Iowa law requiring schools to remove any library book containing a description of a sex act. And in April of this year, the United States Naval Academy's library removed this book and 380 more books after the U.S. Defense Secretary's office ordered the school to get rid of books that promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, I mean, yes, just
all of the above.
I wanted to say something very quickly about the challenges to the rape scene. And it didn't really come up in the beginning, although you did mention this, Lisa, about, and I think you did too, Kristian, about like seeing yourself in books. A lot more children than we care to admit or think about are sexually abused. And I think for a child for whom this is happening or who this happened, like actually seeing that on the page would be potentially a very good thing for them, you know, to be able to see like, I am not alone, and to sort of recognize like she has very mixed feelings about what happened in that situation, right? And to see that their feelings about that are valid, and to take these books away, it just feels so sad to me, you know. I think that it's important for children to see themselves in, you know, like we talk about, you know, certainly children from LGBTQ backgrounds, people of color, but also I think people who are being victimized. It is important to see that they too are not alone. And that, like you said, Kristian, that there is life after.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I wanted to, and I'm sorry if I interrupted, if I apologize, like the rape scene and the before and directly before and after it, right? And again, I don't want this to take up the whole book because the book is about much more than that. You know, it's a wonderful, beautiful book. But the honesty in which she addresses it and the curiosity and the shame that she feels like after it, like I was just like, I mean, I've never experienced that. I'm fortunate enough to, you know, never experience that, but it kind of plugged into being a kid in Catholic school and being curious about sex, sexuality, all that stuff, and just feeling that like weird Catholic shame, or that you shouldn't be thinking about this, or you shouldn't want that, or even as you get older for like, you know, and maybe I'm just neurotic, but I'm just saying like, it's so weird what that scene made me feel like, and the before and after, even though I've never experienced that in my particular life, right? Thankfully, right? But I was just blown away by her use of language, her honesty, and just how like before it happens and then after it happens, you know, and very much like how she's made to feel bad about it when she did like nothing wrong, you know what I mean? And I feel that that is can be a universal feeling as far as like your own sexuality when you're growing up and being like, you feel like, I mean, maybe it was just me, but I know a lot of you feel like crap because you're having these feelings, and certain religions or you know are telling you, oh, this is bad, this is bad. And so I just felt like, even though that particular, there's another way to identify with that particular experience that she had, even if you never had it. And I feel like that's the beauty of this book, right? Is that I am not from that experience of anything that she's like really experienced, but I identify with so much of it just because of the smaller things that I've gone through in my life. Like, if you know.
Yeah, and adding on to what Amanda said about children who are abused being able to see themselves in this, or children who know someone who's been abused in this. Like there are several things in this book that I feel has such value. For instance, she did manage to tell her brother
Mhm.
and they kept it quiet. But ultimately, her brother went and told someone. And we know that rape is one of the most underreported crimes in America, that a vast majority of people, not a vast majority, but the percentage is as high as estimated as something like 30% of rapes and sex don't get reported because they're afraid people won't believe them or their own shame or their own guilt. And we know that silence is how victims are kept victims and keep that silence. So seeing this and maybe being in that situation or knowing someone and understanding if I say something, then maybe there can be help. There, right? Sometimes we find courage in the stories of others. And so there's value to someone being able to see that. Is that a hard information for children of a certain age? Sure, maybe, right? We want to keep it to a high school level or something like that. But that's also where it comes to where's the conversation? Where are the conversations we have? Where do we do that? Because in America, kids in high school are having sex, right? So the notion that just the fact that she was having sex as a teen and got pregnant is one thing, but you're an 8-year old who's been abused, and somehow that's something we shouldn't talk about when we know child sexual assault is a problem in the US. That's a discussion that needs to be had, and having it being able to do it through the lens of someone who's been through it and can give you those feelings, that's such value. That adds such value to the conversation.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because something I want to ask is how does banning autobiographical books like this impact writers, especially those from marginalized backgrounds, who want to tell the truth of their lived experiences? Lisa.
I think it goes back to what Amanda, self-censorship. When you can't see those stories in large volumes out in the world, you tend not to write them. Or if you see the handful out there and they're beautifully done and beautifully written, like this one by Maya Angelou, you think my story has no value or I can't put it out there because it's going to be banned. And I'm going to add it to something that to some may sound slightly frivolous because I'm in the romance genre. I've actually spoken to several Black authors who were interested in writing historical romance, several of them who have been writing historical romance featuring white characters, who said to me, it never occurred to me that I could write a historical romance with two Black characters until I picked up your Highlander book. And there's a part of me that went, huh? Now I'm of a certain age. I'm slightly more mature than this person by about 15, 20 years, I think. So, I've reached that part in my life that I now recognize from like my grandmother, my great mother, grandmother, where they used to say, I've lived long enough, I can say what I want to say. I've kind of reached that stage in life, right? But so many of us as Black writers are in this publishing industry where our stories have not been published, have not been valued. So we tend not to want to write them because we think we can't put them out in the environment. And that's something that needs to change, but it's hard to change when people are censoring or they're talking about, we don't want to see these stories from that perspective, and we're going to ban it or we're going to fight against it because that perspective has no value. And and that's not what they're saying overtly, but that's the message I get when someone says I'm banning or challenging or taking it off the shelf. This perspective has no value, therefore nobody should be reading it. And that has a very detrimental effect. I think it stops a lot of people from sharing their stories.
Lisa, I am guilty of that very thing. When I first started writing, it never even occurred to me to have my main character be a Black woman or a biracial woman, because those are not the heroes that I see. So how can that be a hero? How can that be a main character? Because, you know, you're told your entire life you're a side character at best.
Mm.
So
And a
it's just
certain kind of side character, right? The
right.
sexy best
Yeah.
friend, yeah.
No, I'm really just the, you know, the mulatto girl who does the cleaning.
And not to take over this conversation, but my hero's Black. My heroine is Black, but she's also biracial. So I I say Black because we know that if you had that drop, you were Black.
The one drop rule.
Right. Right. Um, but I also say biracial, and I have the experience of I come from a family where we married all kinds of people, so I have quite a few biracial cousins. And the experience for me to write this character who was biracial, and in her story, she actually you get to see some of her challenges and struggles and her internal growth with dealing with the fact that she was biracial in a country where they were in the minority, right? And the first in-person book club I went to for this book, there was a biracial woman in the book club who had read my book and started talking about what it meant to her to have that character in the book and to actually acknowledge the fact that she's biracial in the book and how that affected her growing up. And she was like on the verge of tear. And I'm going to tell you, it brought tears to my eyes to know that something I wrote touched someone else in that way, because she said she'd never read a book, not a fiction book, where she saw a character who was her dealing with the stuff she dealt with, go through life and be the heroine in the story, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to tell you, as an artist or a writer, that is something powerful, and it makes you want to do more and know that you gotta put more of those stories out there. But we don't have enough of them. We don't have enough of them.
We don't. And there are layers to being biracial, as I'm sure Kristian can attest. Like, you know, it's the Black trauma, the white guilt, and the sense that you don't belong in either of those worlds.
Yeah.
Is that your preach?
Yeah,
Oh
he's
yeah,
like,
that's just me raising my hand, just being like, yep, yep.
So I think we're still on the same question, right? About how does this impact marginalized writers who want to talk about their lived experiences? Kristian, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, how could it not affect it, right? I mean, I think everything, I feel like just being like everything Lisa said, copy paste, like, I mean, I think that like, it's so interesting to me because like, again, I'm half Latin and my father was from a country called Estonia and my mother's from Colombia, right? And so, um, but I look the way I do. I mean, I look as white can be, like, I mean, that's just the way it is. But the thing that I've always found myself drifting towards, like particularly in comics, and the things that I read is like, growing up in the 80s and 90s, all the characters were white, like everyone was white. And then there's this company called Milestone came along, and it was like creators who were Black, and like they had people of color and stuff like that. And I remember picking that up and just being like, oh my God, something different from a different viewpoint, it's not just square jawed white guy, you know what I mean? And I guess I've just always been that type of person who likes to see things from a different viewpoint, right? Particularly different cultures, right? And so, I mean, if you ban authors of a particular race or, creed or anything, like I just feel like it just shortcuts the the connections that we have between human beings, right? Because it's like the only way that I'm going to get to know you is to be able to read about your experience. So, I mean, I feel like obviously it hurts, authors of that are marginalized, but I feel like it also hurts the people that aren't, because you need,
Mm,
the only way that we're going to get along is to, or traverse this whole like divide, is to be able to like look and realize like other people's experiences and how terrible they are. And but the thing that I keep coming up against is, um in all my interviews, in all my podcasts, and I've, speaking to so many people, I've been doing it for 13 years. I've realized that the more different people are, the more the same you are, right? So the
mm,
more you marginalize voices, the more that you censor marginalized voices, the more that you're reducing your own experience. And like even just reading this book, like I found so much to identify with. And I'm not Maya Angelou, but like there were so many things that in my own particular experience where I was like, oh, that's like not exactly what I went through, right? Like, but I'm just saying like I saw something in it. So I think that if you marginalize, I mean, excuse me, if you censor, you know, people from certain backgrounds, you're hurting yourself. You know what I mean? Because there are things that you can learn from anyone, and there's experiences you can, and your mind can be opened up. So I just think it hurts everyone. It just doesn't hurt one group in particular.
Amanda, do you need me to repeat the question?
No, although I don't know that I have much to add. I think Lisa and Kristian said that so very, very well. We are a community, and a diverse community, and our art should reflect that.
Agreed. And speaking of community, I wanted to share that after the Matsuboro School District banning, the Office for Intellectual Freedom, joined by Alaska Libraries, the Freedom to Read Foundation, the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, and the American Booksellers for Free Expression sent a letter to the board urging them to return the books to the curriculum. The community protest led to the board rescinding its decision, and the books remain available in the schools. And then when the book was challenged in Manheim Township, Pennsylvania, the book was retained in the 9th grade English curriculum with the stipulation that it be taught later in the year after a public forum was held with parents to discuss the book and the entire literary canon of the English department. So in these cases, community action did make a difference and did spur more conversations. So I do want to thank all of you for having this conversation with me. Kristian, what are the reasons people should read this book?
I mean, it's just so, it's weird to say it, right? Because a lot of it is tragic, but I feel like in tragedy, there is inspiration, right? I feel like in another person's experience of being oppressed and maybe not knowing their place, this is an individual who got past it all, right? Like especially it being an autobiography, you kind of know where it went, like if you do any bit of research on Maya Angelou. So I mean, to me, I feel the language is just beautiful. Like just reading every sentence. There were so many things where I wanted to underline and be like, oh, this passage, oh, this, I mean, obviously she's a poet, and you don't need me to tell you that Maya Angelou is an amazing writer. But I mean, I just feel like for me, again, it's the sort of thing where it's like it's inspirational to me because you can start here and you can go here. Like you don't just have to be here, and you don't have to be what other people say you are, right? Like you can rise above your station or the station that society wants to keep you down at. You know what I mean? And the thing is like this particular book, it's not necessarily like, oh, I became, the head of a corporation, or I became the leader of my, like, this is somebody going through the travails of their childhood and getting through it, like getting through it, right? And so that's the reason why I feel like it's it's different. I don't want to say abnormal because that's it, but it's yeah, I mean, it's just unique, and and beautiful. And I can't imagine somebody not reading this. And even with the way that it ended for me, where I was like, oh no, no, no. And then, it ended up being okay. I just feel like it's an inspiration. Like, honestly, like I did not expect to be as moved by this book as I was. And just like, kind of like, oh, mind blown. But I was.
Amanda, why should people read this book?
Listening to everyone, I think, talk about the book and my Angelou, I feel like I just have this sense like she is a national treasure for us, and that read it for that reason alone.
Mm.
That she is tapping into something that is unique to her situation and also just incredibly human. And the language is beautiful. It is inspirational. And for me, I feel like it will connect you to our larger community in a really positive way. And I don't know, I think we need that so much. We need to defend and defend these treasures, these national treasures, these global treasures, these human treasures, and avail ourselves of them, especially in times like this where we need that inspiration and we need to see someone who is so brave and just, I think, unflinching in her willingness and determination to share her story.
Lisa.
Kristian said, he doesn't need to tell anyone that she's a phenomenal writer, and we don't, but I'm gonna say it because she's a phenomenal writer. I am just in awe at how this woman puts words together. And for a book that is about some really dark moments in her life, some tragic and trauma-filled moments, the language with which she shares those with us is absolutely beautiful. And in that, there's a message of overcoming, a message that I think maybe even America needs to hear, that history of tragedy and negativity and bad things happen, but you can rise above that and become something else. And if you familiar with two of her most famous poems, right? Still I Rise, right? Or I Am a Woman Phenomenally. If you want to understand what she meant by that, how she could still rise, why she was a woman phenomenally, you need to read I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, and you will understand the magic and the aura that was Maya Angelou.
Thank you. Thank you all for a great start to this season. Before we wrap up, Amanda, where can people find you and support your work?
You can find me on my website, amandaskenandore.com. I have a contact page there and on Instagram and Facebook. Thank you so much for having me, Tonya, and for the wonderful conversation, Lisa and Kristian.
Kristian?
You can find me at parttimefanboy.com. I have a little web comic again called The Periwinkle Puss at periwinklepuss.com. Social media, I'm pretty much only on Blue Sky and it's Part-Time Fanboy because I don't know, the others are so dodgy. I don't know. I know everyone's still on them, but I'm just like, I can't with the billionaires. So yeah, that's pretty much me. Only on Blue Sky right now. I mean, who knows what's going to happen, but yeah, pretty much social media, it's Blue Sky. I do have a Facebook account, but I don't really, yeah, you can find me on there too, but I won't respond.
Lisa?
You can find me at my website, lisarayne.com, and that last name is spelled Rayne. I am predominantly on Instagram, but I do post now and then on Threads. Like Kristian, I have a Facebook account, but I'm not on there very often, so I may respond, but it may take me a while. So that would be why. And on social media, you can find me at author Rayne, so the word author and then my last name.
Well, that is it for today's conversation. Thank you all for being phenomenal first guests. And thank you, listeners. If you enjoyed this conversation, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to both Femme On and to my YouTube channel, of course. Thank you for listening, and more importantly, thank you for reading.